My name is John Bolstridge, my wife Emily. We have lived up here in Alaska for 8 years and been at ACF for 8 years.
So I grew up in a remote Christian community in northern British Columbia. The goal of these communities was to separate from the world and somehow gain spiritual perfection outside of the influence of the evils of the world.
So I grew up in South Georgia on one of these communities. So these communes were started by a group of people in South Florida back in the 70s called the Move of God. They decided to separate themselves from the church, basically cut themselves off from a lot of worldly influence. All of our schooling was done by the parents and the elders. All of our meals were together. We all lived on the same property. All of our influence came from within the community, the elders or the leaders of the communes. There was kind of a hierarchy of ministry, the high up ministry, which then went down to the local ministry and elders, and then there was the people. And that was how we were taught that the flow of God speaking to people went. You had to go through the eldership back up in order to hear from God.
For me, I think the thing that really got my attention that something was wrong was when my mom died of cancer. I began to realize that I was feeling guilty for that somehow her death was like a consequence of sin or something, or that punishment or something. And I just began to realize that I didn't really have a good understanding of Jesus' sacrifice. Perfection was so stressed in how we grew up that, I always felt like you had to add something more onto Jesus' sacrifice and that it wasn't enough. Then I just started seeing all kinds of other things that didn't line up with like a loving God and like a gracious God, because we didn't hear much about grace and love.
I would go to the services and we would hear that God doesn't love you because you still have sin in your life, and He hates sin, and if you have sin, He doesn't love you, or God hates you. That was coming over the pulpit. We were shamed if we went and asked and tried to question things because we weren't high up enough. We weren't hearing from God appropriately. And so 8 years ago, we started looking and asking God to lead us somewhere else. I said, I can't lead a family. I can't raise my children in this environment anymore. We came up to Alaska in January and visited my brother-in-law in Wasilla and went to Church on the Rock, actually. And my mind was blown. I'd never been to a church outside of my church where I saw God moving. I hadn't really gone to many other churches. I was told that if you go to other churches, you are the tares. And we were like, God is moving in Alaska. And that was in January, and we were in Alaska April 2nd. Just sold everything and moved to Alaska. And during that process, we came back and told some people we were moving. We were basically shunned from the minute that we announced that we were leaving. So the first week we came to ACF, there's a 30-foot banner out front that said Porn Sunday on it. That was the first week we came to ACF, and my mind was blown that there was a community of believers that would be open about their sin, that would be not shaming each other, and like when they found out about some sin in each other's lives, wouldn't like spread it around throughout the community, as gossip. Like I had never heard or seen that before. And I've really changed in the way that I view the gospel and view God, and just have learned to love people and learned that God is love. He's not about condemnation and shame in my life. He's not there with a big stick ready to beat me over the head every time I make a mistake. And as a community of believers, we are truly in this together. We are here for each other to point each other to Christ and to bring our community together. So my life has been radically changed since coming out of that past environment and being at ACF and being in a community of believers that cares about each other and cares about their community.